Xbox's weekend outage has gamers asking, do we really own our game library? I'm Nick, and this is the QTB Speedrun. Well, it was a frustrating weekend for Xbox players as Microsoft's authentication servers went down over the weekend, resulting in many gamers being unable to play some or all of their games, and sparking a conversation about game ownership rights that we haven't seen since the release of the Xbox One in 2013. So what exactly happened here? Well, over the weekend, many players found when they tried to launch an Xbox game, they would receive an error message stating that they needed to sign in order to play that game. Of course, they were signed in and connected to the internet. Some players had this issue, and many didn't, which caused some confusion as to what kind of outage was actually happening. For some gamers, it certainly was a good thing that this outage didn't seem to affect them, but for the ones that did, it created a lot of confusion and especially a lot of frustration as to how the heck DRM, or digital rights management, actually works. WindowsCentral.com recently published an article that helped to shed a lot of light onto specifically what was happening to people that were using something called a cloud login. Now, for most people, when you log in on a sole Xbox, that Xbox is actually set as your home console, meaning that the DRM restrictions are a lot looser and will let you go for longer stretches of time without needing to verify online that you own games. Now, in this particular instance, the outage triggered some sort of glitch that resulted in some players that did have the home console set up still not being able to access their games, and that is something that Microsoft has announced they're actively working on a fix for. But again, a lot of the problems seem to come from people that were using cloud logins. What this means is that if you log into your Xbox account from any console other than the one that is set to your home account, you essentially have to verify that you have ownership of the games that you're playing every single time that you play them. In other words, the DRM is much more restrictive. This is more common than you might think, as anybody that owns more than one Xbox console can only have one set as their home version, and as people upgrade their consoles, they tend to hang on to the older ones, meaning other family members or other rooms in the same household can potentially be using the same Xbox account. Or, in some cases, people will use this home and cloud login function to actually let their friends have access to their game library. Now, from my perspective, one of the problems I'm seeing here is that the verification server will not actually check to see whether or not you own a game until you have booted it up for the first time. That means if you digitally purchase a game or even install a game but haven't played it yet, if the verification servers go offline, you will not be able to start that game up for the first time. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a pretty extensive backlog and a lot of games that are installed that I haven't played before, and the thought of not being able to access them because of some arbitrary verification server giving a thumbs up is kind of a big deal. Perhaps even worse is that if you've played an Xbox One game on the same account and then transferred it digitally to the Xbox Series S or X, the verification server still hasn't given you that thumbs up until you've booted it for the first time on that next-gen device. Now, as of right now, the verification servers are up and running normally, but for Microsoft, the damage has already been done, because the conversation has been unearthed about DRM that really hasn't been spoken about at this level since 2013. It was during this year that Microsoft unveiled their controversial decision to have the Xbox One severely restrict DRM to the point that you couldn't take a game that you physically owned and hand it to a friend to let them borrow it and play it on their account. Sony created a response video to this of them having, a PS4 game get handed from one friend to the other, and ultimately the fan backlash was so severe that they had to reverse that decision entirely, and the Xbox One did not go in that direction. But it seems like over the last 9 years that Microsoft has really been playing the long game, because the naturally increasing size of games not being able to fit on a physical disc, plus the progressive industry abandonment of physical media formats, with the exception of Nintendo, has kind of implemented these DRM policies for them without having to so much as lift a finger. Now look, if there's one thing that the Xbox team is good at doing at Microsoft, it's their ability to quickly and decisively address consumer backlash in a way that not only addresses the initial problem, but sometimes gives gamers a little bit more than they bargained for as a way of apologizing. What I mean by that is just last year there was the leaked news that they were going to be increasing their monthly subscription costs, And the consumer backlash was so swift and severe that within 48 hours, they had put out a press release that not only were they going to not implement that price increase, they were also going to make it so that all free-to-play games on Xbox would no longer require Xbox Live Gold, which absolutely shocked people, not only at the generosity of doing something like that, but the way they were able to rally and get that decision out very quickly. Now, one of the ways I think Microsoft can help address this in a way that makes everybody happy is to take that verification system and move it to an earlier step in the game purchasing process. What I mean by that is that instead of having it check when you boot the game for the first time to see if you have the rights to actually play the game, why not do it at the time when the digital purchase is made or when the download occurs, so that you don't have to worry about those servers being online if you're playing on your home console a year, 2 years, or more down the road. And really, this should go without saying, but if you own the physical version of a game and you went through the process of updating and patching it because you couldn't fit the whole game on the original disc, when you have that disc in your Xbox, you should be able to play that game with no verification server ever needed, full stop, end of story. However, despite all this, Microsoft is showing some positive signs that they still do value the ability to purchase and own physical media. In an article from GameRant.com, they lay out that Microsoft has recently filed for a patent that will allow the Xbox Series S, a console without a physical disk drive, to allow you to physically validate that you own these games through an external source like a smartphone or a laptop in order to let you take a physical game and actually get the rights to download it digitally on their storefront. If there is one thing that Nintendo has taught us over the Switch generation, it's that there is very much still a market for people that want to own games that are complete on one piece of physical media. They don't have to worry about patching or updating, and more importantly, an online server doesn't have to tell them that they have access to the game, so they can take it and play it anywhere. And more importantly, over the last 5 years or so, look at all the different companies that have popped up that are solely dedicated to taking digital-only indie games on the Switch and giving them physical releases. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World had a blockbuster amount of sales for limited-run games simply because people were afraid it was going to get digitally pulled again like it did the first time. Ultimately, regardless of the direction that the gaming industry is going towards in its seemingly inevitable conquest to create an exclusive space of online-only, digitally owned content, the DRM debate is not going away anytime soon. Game preservationists are now looking at what's going to happen when 50, 100 years or more down the road, future gamers are trying to come back and play the games of today only to find that the servers are no longer available to download those titles, or arbitrary infrastructure like verification systems further complicate their ability to simply enjoy video games. A problem that retro gamers of today really don't have for the most part, as most past consoles are simply plug and play as long as you have the cartridge, the console, or the TV if needed. So we as gamers need to use these types of outages as a way to bring this topic to the forefront, make our voices heard, and ensure that the gamers of the future can play today's games and not just see them or hear about them. I'm Nick, and that was the QTB Speedrun.